Hi, I'm Heather Doyle Fraser, and I'm here with Danielle Baird, and we are doing a webinar today on how to build your book blueprint and how that blueprint can be your BFF, best friend. That's right, you heard it here. So, where should we start, Danielle?
Well, I think, I posted a little bit about this on Facebook, but, when we started talking about this topic and you're like, oh, an outline is such a great thing. I was like, like, I just am not an outline person. And so maybe we can start off just by talking a little bit about, some of the reasons you helped me reconsider my position on outlines.
Right. Well, I think first of all, in my mind, the way that I think about an outline is maybe different than the way that most people think about an outline. I don't think about an outline as being necessarily Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, and being all very linear and logical, although an outline is linear most of the time. But it doesn't have to be this kind of confining prison that some people think it is. And it doesn't have to be drudgery either. So when I think of an outline, I'm thinking about something that's really dynamic. It may not fall into necessarily those Roman numerals. It could be more of a mind map, or it could be, it can take many, it could be a flow chart. It could take many different forms. Eventually, it's going to get onto a page as an outline, but it can start at any place. So I think for me, the idea of an outline really starts with a brainstorming session. And who doesn't love a brainstorming session? Super fun. So super creative. And I think that, so when I think about an outline, knowing what it can do for your writing process and knowing that it starts with this super creative activity of brainstorming, it's just all a win-win.
It is. And I, like, when we started talking about some of these different creative forms that your outline can take, I realized that maybe I do sometimes create outlines without even realizing it. Like I might doodle something in my sketchbook. I might pull out a bunch of Post-its or print pieces of paper out and move things around and get those things ready. But really, when I hear you start talking about outline, I imagine those Roman numerals and like writing these essays in elementary school where it was like, you need your introduction and 3 points and the conclusion where you restate your thesis statement. And it's like, oh no.
Who wants to do that? Especially when I have such an amazing book idea that doesn't fall into those categories, I think.
And so once you start to sketch out, this outline, and how does that actually really support you once you get into the writing?
So when you have an outline behind you, or in front of you, I guess, not behind you, when you have it supporting you that way, it may not be that you are going to, the outline that you create may not be the end all be all. It may not be what your book ends up being, but it's a place to start for you. And it gives you a lot of freedom. So let's say you know that you want to cover, like, when you're brainstorming, you're thinking, okay, I have 6 main points that I want the reader to get from this book. 6 things that I really know have to be in the book without a doubt. And so you write those 6 things down, and then you think, all right, well, when I'm talking about this, point 1, what is included in that? What needs to be there? Okay, well, I need to include A, B, and C. And then in this one over here, and I'm not saying that it has to follow the first one, but in this section over here, this needs to include D, E, and F, and X, Y, Z. And so you're kind of just thinking, just in those sections, okay, what does that need to include? These to includes these things. And so you go through your outline, you have it all in there, and then all of a sudden you look at it and you think, well, I'm covering this over here and over here. Does it need to be covered in both places? Or do I just really need to cover it here and I don't need to cover it over here because I know I've done it before up here? So it gives you some flexibility there. It enables you not to run into the problem of kind of being redundant or repetitive. And then it also frees you to know, okay, I'm talking about this now. I don't need to worry about these other things. They're going to come into my head, but I don't need to worry about them because I know where they're going to be covered.
Yeah, so it's kind of like by taking all these ideas that you have in your head and just capturing them kind of in one place on paper, even if it's not perfectly organized right now, that it kind of frees up some of that back channel of your mind to be able to really focus on one thing at a time and not worry about holding on to all those bits and pieces.
So, and there might even be times when you're writing. Let's say you've moved past the outline. You outlined things, and then you're into your writing piece. You're writing something, and then you think, oh, I have to talk about this, but I don't want to talk about it here because this is too soon. But I don't know where to talk about it. Look at your outline. Oh, if it's perfect in this section over here, just write it down right now. You can let it go. You don't have to worry about it. You'll come back to it. It's there. You don't have to stress about it. You don't have to remember it. Nothing like that. And so what you're saying is exactly right. It frees up that mental space you can attend to what you need to do right now.
Awesome. I know I have a tendency to kind of hold on to all those pieces. And so I love that idea of just being able to capture it and, pop it into your outline, knowing that it's not permanent wherever you decide to put it. You can always move things around later, but that it just kind of frees up some of that creative energy for you.
That also brings up another point, Danielle, when you say it doesn't have to stay where it is or you can move it around. So that also goes to how you are writing it. You don't have to write this in the order that you write your outline. You can skip around when you have an outline. You can write this section. Then you can go over here and write this section. They don't have to follow each other. You can write them separately because maybe you're not feeling inspired to write it in a chronological way. But this morning when you wake up, you're feeling really inspired to write about something sort of midway through, or what you're thinking might be 3/4 of the way through the book. That's okay. Write that section. And then if it stays there, great. If it doesn't, you can move it.
And so I think part of me, like when I hear that, like it sounds exciting, but it also would make me like, I feel a little bit nervous. And maybe that is like why the outline is so great, like that it has these like benchmarks and kind of placeholder buckets for you to write, in pieces, because like on one hand, for me, the thought of say writing, 50,000 words straight through in order, perfectly drafted the first time, like feels like a lot of pressure. And then
because it is.
But I think like I had this assumption that like that is how you write a book. Like you sit down and you're like, this is the story I'm going to tell, and I'm just going to sit here and type, and it's all going to just come out of me perfectly.
It is all going to come out of you, and it's not going to be perfect the first time. And that's what the writing process is. It's called a process because it is a process. You write, you revise, you write, you revise, you write, you revise, and revise, and then after you've done all your revisions, then you edit.
Yeah, and so like I think this, the idea of kind of being able to skip around like feels really good. And I know that in an earlier talk, you mentioned how like if you're kind of having writer's block one day, that you could, skip to a different area of the manuscript that you're working on, or like that could be an opportunity to go back and start to revise some things that you had already written. And so just to, that like writer's block doesn't necessarily mean like I can't work today.
Right. Yeah. So it means maybe that you don't want to write what you thought you were going to write. So you can write something else. And then if really the writing isn't working, then that's when you do some revision or you do some editing on stuff you've already revised. It's a very fluid, dynamic process, so that doesn't have to follow an exact every single day. This needs to be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think what feels the best and feels easiest at that moment is usually where you're going to have the most success. So if you feel like not writing chronologically, don't write chronologically. If it feels good to skip around, skip around. And by having that outline, you've just given yourself so much freedom to be able to do that. If you don't have that, you don't know where to go. How much more overwhelming is it right then if you don't have an outline? You have no idea what's coming or where you want to go. And not to say that, I mean, most outlines shift, they change, because once you get into the writing process, things do evolve. But that is, everything has to start from somewhere. And that gives you a really good place to start.
So I know for me, just kind of thinking about it, like, let's say that I'm at a stage where I have my big idea and I know kind of the general topic that I want to write about. Where do you kind of suggest, like, are there some questions people can ask themselves to start to pull out some of the information they might want to use to start their outline?
Well, I would say, first of all, you need to know why you are writing the book. And you need to know who you're writing it for. And additionally, you need to know who your audience is, which is a little bit different than who you're writing it for. Once you've kind of gone through that, I think the next questions are, okay, what do I want to share most about this? What are the takeaways that I want to make sure my readers get and that I convey when I'm writing this? And I would do that on, like in each, whether you're doing a chapter book or whether you're doing an essay-based book, if you have parts, basically looking at each little subsection, whether it's a chapter or an essay or whatever it is, what do I want to say? What do I want my readers to receive? And that is really helpful to kind of streamline your thinking on where you want to go.
Oh, sorry, we froze a little bit there. And so can you, like, tease out just a little bit more that difference between who are you writing this for and who your audience is? Because I don't know, that was a little bit confusing for me.
Mm-hmm. So who are you writing this book for? In most instances, I have found with people and with myself that you're usually writing the book for yourself, especially if it's something that is, a message that you want to share, because you have experienced something and you want to be able to share that with other people, but the impact that it had on you inspired you to want to write this book. And so really, you're writing this book for you as an exercise to further share that, whatever you have. And when you're writing, things get hard sometimes. It's difficult to write a book. So if you don't have that inner knowing that this book is, I'm writing this for me and I am totally worth that. I am committed to myself for writing this book. When it gets hard, that's the thing that can keep you going, because you know that this is really my dream. This is my goal. This is what I've been wanting to do for a long time. And sometimes if you have like an exterior motives, like I want to make $1 million, That's why I'm writing the book. So I'm writing this book for these other people, but I really want to write, I want to, get rich on it. That's not going to help you when you are in the really tough times there. Now, who is your audience? That question is more about who is your ideal reader? Who is the person that you picture when you're telling your story or when you're writing? And that's really important to keep in mind, because although your voice is always going to be, your unique kind of construct, you need to know who you're writing to, because if you can picture them, and if you were thinking, okay, if I was having a conversation with Julie and she was listening to me, would she understand what I'm trying to say right now? Would she be able to make these connections? Would she be able to go from point A to point B to point C with me? And if I really reflect on that and I don't think so, then I need to change the way that I'm going to be writing this. I need to kind of think about how my message is going to be best received using my voice, using my writing strengths, but how I can help the audience along. Are you still there, Danielle? So, that all being said, we kind of talked a little bit about this before, but so when you have this outline that is kind of holding that space for you, one thing that I see happen with a lot of writers is they kind of, if they don't have an outline, they start losing their place in the manuscript occasionally. They forget that they covered something before, or they fall into the trap of getting taken by their own tangents. So they'll be writing, and then that will lead to the next thing, and then that will lead to the next thing, and then that will lead to the next thing, and it will kind of be a circular writing pattern that leaves you in this corner over here, and you have no idea how to get back to where you were or how that relates to what you were saying in the first place. I see that you're back with us, Danielle.
I am. Yay, technical difficulties.
I was just talking about how if you have an outline, you're much less likely to get lost in your own writing. And that often I see people, when they don't have an outline, creating this kind of circular writing pattern. And this happens with really good writers all the time, because they're so good at writing, and they're so good at creating transitions, and they're so good at connection, that all of a sudden they've gone down this path that they never really wanted to go, but it all makes sense until you get there, and then you think, how did I end up here? Or how does this relate to this over here where I started? This has nothing to do with it. So that's the other thing that can really be helpful with an outline. It won't ever let you get lost. And if you are in the middle of something and you think, you know what, I really need to include this piece, then add it. It's not like that outline is there kind of looking down on you. You may not add this. You didn't put it in the outline. No, you can change it anytime.
I love that. And, it's like with that kind of ending up in this circular writing pattern, like you might get stuck, you might get lost. And then I think sometimes that could be an instance where all of a sudden you realize, okay, I've gone off on this tangent. It might be a brilliant tangent, but it's still a tangent and it's got to go. But you might love that writing and be attached. And in some ways, I feel like this is where that like drown your darlings saying comes in.
Mhm.
But like you said, if you're kind of like working on a plan, you're keeping the big picture in mind as well as the little picture of the particular section or chapter that you're currently working in. Hopefully when you get all the way down to your first draft, like you won't have to chop off a third because you suddenly wandered off in some direction.
You may see you want to add things, or you may see you need to take little bits here and there. I've had some instances where, people have written chunks and they just, and they were brilliant like brilliant little gems within something else. And we decided, you know what, that is so good, but it's not in this book. It doesn't go here. And so what does that mean? That means it goes over here in a file for when the next book happens. And there's lots of experiences that I've had working with people where we're writing book 1, and during that writing process, we find there's little bits of book 2 that are kind of coming in, and we just, okay, it's all right. You're not ready yet, but we're going to put you over here, and then we can come back to you.
Keep you safe until it's time. And who knows too, like some of those like anecdotes, if they're just not quite right for the book, it could be a blog post, it could be promo material, it could be bonus material that you're going to include on your website, for people to enjoy later.
Yep.
So,
Or it could go into, let's say you decided to do an online course with this later on. That could be part of that. I mean, you never know. But
yeah, so none of it usually goes to waste.
No, you don't have to just say, you're gone. No, you don't need to do that.
And so I feel like, we've kind of talked about, I think if you're sort of starting from scratch, but it seems like lately I've been hearing a lot of people talking about kind of taking their blog posts or Facebook posts, or, they've kind of realized that they've accumulated all of this content, and they may, kind of feel the nudge, hey, maybe I should write a book, or their friends are telling them, oh my God, you totally need to write a book. And they're like, okay. And they gather up all their writing and look at it and maybe feel a little bit overwhelmed. And so how can an outline help those people?
Well, so there are one of two ways you can approach that. You can still do sort of you can take a look at, this is my work. This is all of my work, my beautiful work. What do I wrote all this stuff. So what do I think are the main things that I talk about? What are the main ideas that I think that I've been, talking about for over the past 6 months or year or 2 years or whatever? And you could start an outline with that sort of in mind, thinking like, if I were going to take a look at this, all of this writing, and I were to say, what would I want my writing to convey to people? And then start creating an outline from that. And then maybe you could slot those pieces of writing in this kind of really loose, really, really broad, loose outline. And then you may discover as you're going through that process, okay, yes, I do talk about these 6 things. And I also talk about these other 2 things that I didn't realize were a really big thing for me. So then you add that to the outline, and that is like another bucket for your content. And when you go through that process of kind of sorting your material combined with what's the message I want to release, that kind of dance creates an outline for you. And then you can see, all right, I really want to talk about this point. But while I do have material to go there, I don't think that I have enough. I don't think that I am adequately showing my passion for this area. So what does that mean? that means I just need to write a few more things in that area. But it shows you where you need to spend more of your time. And of course, you are going to have to do some things to that writing. Normally, you cannot just go, I've written all this, here's the book. That's normally not how it happens. But those things help you to create that book. And when you put them all together, you can see, okay, here's my holes. Here are the places where I am super solid. And then here are some places that I would like to expand. They're not necessarily holes, but they need a little bit more. So that's one way an outline can help you there.
That's really helpful. And so I sort of heard that there's like maybe two ways to look at this, just to make sure that I'm learning right along with everyone else here. So if I've got all my blog posts, I can take them and look at them and kind of take this 10,000-foot view and find my themes and build my outline from there, and maybe, you know, kind of do the sort and the shuffle of, okay, what makes sense. And then from there, I can look and see where my holes are, where do I kind of feel like I might need to add some more, or maybe this doesn't belong. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like you could kind of also combine the two methods that you've talked about, where even though you have this huge repository of content, you could kind of leave that all off on the side for the moment and just sit down with some blank paper and pens or your word processor and think about that narrative just without looking at any of your work. And then once you've kind of started to sketch in that outline, your points, then you can say, okay, here's my framework. Mm-hmm. Go and get my big pile. Mm-hmm. Start going, okay, you go here, you go there, you go here. And I know when I've done this, not necessarily, I haven't done it for a book, but I've done it for catalogs. I've done it for websites and just some other big projects. I know like my method is like the high level sort. So it's like, you go in A, you go in B, you go in C, okay, like, and then you take one little pile and look at that, and then maybe reorder and shuffle and kind of drill down, because I know how, like, when you suddenly realize that you have a stack of paper like this, that you need to like read and go through, like, it's overwhelming.
And so when you're in that place, I think that you're completely right. Just do a really quick, like, okay, that goes here, that goes there, that goes there. And don't really ruminate over it. Just boom, 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 boom. What's your gut reaction as to why that, you know, just that goes there. And what I see people have a tendency to do at a certain point is think that they have to include every single thing that they've written somewhere in that book. And that doesn't have to happen. There are some things that just aren't going to be part of it, and that's okay. Just because you wrote it doesn't mean it needs to go into the book. There's going to be plenty that goes into the book, and then there's going to be other stuff that you may need to create from scratch right now that goes into the book. And there's some pieces that just don't fit, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And just like to sort of underscore like the overwhelm and like this, the biggest tip I have like is to like have some sort of physical representation of your pieces, at least for me, and like to do that like in space, like physical space, versus throwing it all in a Word document that's hundreds of pages long and trying to like find this and cut it and paste it. Like I usually would do that second, but I found that like Post-its and paper usually help me a lot. So like if you are stuck on that stage and you've just been trying to do it digitally, like maybe try and use some paper.
Yeah, and so you could, and even if you did it partly with paper, like let's say you have hundreds of pages of you know, stuff that you've written, hundreds, and then you think, do I print all that out? Like, how can I, like, that's like 3 reams of paper. I've got 15, you know, like, what do I do about that? I was going to go through all my ink and like, you know, so start out with a few. Start out with some, and then, okay, I'm going to do these 10 today. These fall here. And then the next day you can do 10 more. And it might get down to a point where you feel like, I think I can do the rest of these online. They feel okay to do online now that I've gotten through a few of these, pieces. So yeah, I think that, and not thinking you have to do all of it right now. I think that is something that gets really overwhelming with people too. Just pick a chunk. Start with one. Don't think you have to do the whole thing. And that makes it a lot more manageable.
That's a great tip, because I'm totally in that camp of okay, I'm going to sort my content today.
It's all or nothing.
It's all or nothing. Lock the door, turn off the phone,
Yeah.
And sometimes that works and it's great. And then sometimes it gets me into trouble because I'm like, well, I don't have 8 hours today to sort content. So I'm going to do it tomorrow.
Yeah. And tomorrow. But sometimes you get in there, let's say you said, I'm blocking 8 hours doing it. You get in there, and after about 3 or 4 hours, you start saying, I have no idea. It all looks the same to me now. I guess it could go there. It could go there. It could go all these places. Who knows? Throwing up my hands. Done. Not even doing this book.
And so that's a sign you might need a break.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what happens a lot of times. And so really at the outset, maybe saying, I'm going to do a chunk of it today, and then I'll come back and do another chunk another day.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that, in doing my coloring book, I said, I'm usually more of a fire hose kind of worker. I just sit down and plow through a whole bunch of stuff. But the coloring book, I experimented with just doing 1 or 2 each day. And within a month I was done. I had 52 drawings. And so that experience taught me that, even though that's not how I work, it can be how I work. And it was less stressful than saying okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to make a book in a weekend, because that's just a lot of pressure.
Yeah. It's a lot of pressure.
And it reminds me too about you saying that when you wrote your book, you were not a morning person, but you cultivated that habit, and it ended up really supporting you in getting your book done.
That's what helped me to get my book done. Probably, well, it helped me to write the book because I couldn't carve out the time during the day, because there was always something that was pulling me. And so creating that space for myself early in the morning when there were no other pulls on my time, I had no other choice but to actually sit down and write. Or if I wasn't feeling the writing that day, I did go back and revise what I had already written, or I would, continue to massage different things, but I would always use that time for the purpose of the book.
Yeah, and so it just becomes that trigger for your brain. I'm going to get up, I'm going to make my cup of tea or coffee, take out the dog, and then I'm going to sit down and work on some part of this for the next half an hour or an hour.
And so when you have an outline, that makes it super easy, because you don't have to think about, okay, what do I need? Where am I going next? What am I going to do? But I'm so tired. Maybe I should just go back to bed. If you have the outline there, you can say, okay, where do I want to write today? And you can start writing there. And then if that doesn't feel good, you can say, all right, I'm going to stop here for right now. I'm going to go to a different section because I'm not feeling it right here, but I will. I'm just not at this moment. And so I'm going to go to another section, but I'm going to continue to write because that's what you do.
Yeah, it was there was something now that just in you describing the outline, it kind of reminded me of sitting down at a restaurant and being handed the menu. Like, it just kind of helps guide your choices in that moment. And so you could order like something off the menu and they'll probably make it happen, but it's like you've sort of decided like, well, I've gone to an Italian restaurant and I'm going to eat off of this menu. And so you're not like just trying to, pick something out of the ether. Like, you've got those set choices to pick from, in this moment. And so I think, again, like, that helps not get you into a place of decision fatigue before you even sit down to start doing the work.
Mm-hmm. I think decision fatigue is a really good way to explain that, because if you are worried about writing, and then you're worried about where you need to go, and then you're worried about being inspired to write where you need to go, then it's just a whole bunch of, things you need to think about that you wouldn't have to think about if you had an outline. Not to say that you may be writing and think, oh my gosh, I have this brilliant idea I need to, like, write about this, write about that, and then see, okay, where does it fit on my outline? Sometimes that happens, and that's okay. But if you have the outline set, you'll know where to put it. You'll know where it goes.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that concept has been one of the biggest selling points for me, and in my conversion to loving the outline. Because it's like, I mean, we're all busy. Like, if you're writing a book, you might also be running a business, or you have a family, or, you're managing your house and you've got to take your car in. And so it's like, you kind of like, I write a to-do list, we kind of do that just to get those things out of our head. And I'm starting to see that the outline can sort of almost, you can think of it like a to-do list too. Like, okay, these are the places I want to write about and I want to hit.
They're the places you want to spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
Spend your time. And I mean, truth be told, there are very, very few people that only write. Like, that is a very, 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 very small percentage of the population. Most writers also do other things.
Yes. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is, I feel like, kind of, you talked about how the outline is a good place to kind of start to objectively look at your, kind of 10,000 foot view of your book and look to see, like, where might there be a hole, or where is this not feeling balanced? And I know with the client that we're currently working with, when we looked at his outline at first, you were able just to take a quick look and go, oh, this isn't feeling balanced. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are some of those red flags for you that this area might be a little light, this might be a little bit heavy, so that people can kind of audit their work themselves as they're doing this?
Well, if you have a fairly well-developed outline and you have kind of some, even if it's in like paragraph form, I want to cover this and this and this. And let's say you have, let's say you have 10 chapters. And in 7 of those chapters, you are very detailed about what you're going to be covering. And it looks really good, and it's all like just feeling like it's meshing and everything's good. And then in these 3 chapters over here, you have like one thing that you're going to talk about. So that, when I see that, that makes me think, does this really need its own chapter, first of all? And if it does, what else needs to go there? This needs some more meat in it. It's not feeling equal to the other chapters. And so, like, looking at the topic, is this really deserve its own big thing, or is it kind of a subset of something else? Or, like, I've seen other times where people might have a chapter on that where they want to talk about strategies or skills or tips or things like that. And whenever I see something like that, I wonder, because when we're using strategies and tools and tips and things like that, it's usually when we need them. We're using them when we need them. So if you have a separate chapter just for that, that's not when they need it. All these tips, all together, that's not when they're using them. That's not when they need them. Now, if I look at the rest of the book and I see, oh, well, this tip looks like it would go here. This strategy looks like it would go here. This tool would go great in chapter X. Then I'm thinking, this isn't its own separate chapter. This might be a feature that is in every chapter, or a feature that's in multiple chapters, because it's going to be the most helpful to people when they need it, not at the end of the book, when they're done.
That's such a great tip. And I think I can see that being such a common challenge too, because we're going to sit down and as the author and as the subject matter expert and be like, okay, to do a website, like for me, like, okay, you need hosting. This is, 5 hosting companies. You need your email marketing. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
But, as someone's kind of going through and learning it, like you said, they don't know that information is going to come in chapter 10. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're in chapter 2 in the weeds trying to, apply what they're learning from you. And so I love that idea of seeing where you can kind of break something up and integrate it. And that's, again, like where, your design comes in. And so there could be, a color treatment, or there could be, a special icon that people know to look for as a thread throughout the book, that this is a tool, this is a tip.
And when you do something like that with design, then you make sure that they're not going to miss it. So, because I've heard people say, well, I don't want anyone to miss those things. I want them all separate so that they'll make sure they see all them. Well, if you do something with design, or you set it apart, even, create a box or something like that, they're not going to miss them. They're going to stand out. And so you're going to serve both purposes of giving it to them when they need it and making it stand out. That I remember reading a book by Barbara Kingsolver, Animal Vegetable Miracle, and it was not a fiction book. It was nonfiction, and it was her experience of living off her land for a whole year. And she wrote it with her husband and her daughter. And her husband, and she had it, the chapters were by month. Brilliant idea, because so what she did was she told, what they did to prepare the land in each month, what they harvested, what they sowed, like all of these different things. And then the daughter, she had in every chapter, she had a feature, then it was set apart with design of like a couple of recipes that they used during that month, using the food items, the produce that was in season then. And the January and February and March ones, they were right up front and said, guess what? If you didn't prepare beforehand, you're not going to have anything to cook. But here's what we would say that you would need to use. You would have need to can, some tomatoes and some green beans and some, whatever else. But so she had her own special feature in every chapter, and they could have had a section at the end with recipes, right? They could have had them all together at the end, but it worked so much better to have it right there in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, all the way through. And then the husband, he had a, like maybe something like biochemistry background or something else. And he was, or maybe it was some environmental thing. It's been a while since I read this book, but he had a section that was very science oriented and talked about the science behind the growing and different things like that. And that was in every chapter. And again, you could have had a whole chapter or a section or something else on that, but how boring would that be if you weren't in that particular frame of mind? but when it was interspersed with this brilliant prose from Barbara Kingsolver, it made so much sense, and it was just like, oh, I want to read more of this. It was perfect.
And I think, the thing I love, I mean, as a reader, but then also just kind of looking at the visuals, is having some of these features or call outs or sidebars. It adds some visual interest to the page.
A black and white book that is very text heavy.
Yeah. And so, it's, you're a musician. I am not musically inclined whatsoever, but a lot of times, like when I'm looking to paginate the book, like there is sort of like a visual rhythm to it and some pacing. And so, if you're going through and it's just like a novel is usually this way, which makes
that's sense. Yeah. Yes.
And so the design is usually very boring because you're so deep into the story. Like you don't want to suddenly be distracted because it pulls your mind out of the story. But sometimes I think for something that's a nonfiction book or a memoir or, self-development or something, like if a book is typeset in that way, 40 weeks.
But that's an example, right? I mean, how we really did so much different pacing in that, like visual pacing.
Yeah, because like, and you probably could make this metaphor much better than I can, but it's like, sometimes I think that when everything is visually the same, I think of it as like a monotone. So it's just like, and it's like, that's okay for a little while. But if you just hear tick, 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 like you kind of, you don't want to lose your reader. And so being able to introduce those little elements of surprise or just that something to kind of jar them awake is so important. And it's things that you can be thinking about early on in the outlining and in the writing process. Like you don't need to wait until you have a finished manuscript to go, shoot, maybe I need some pull quotes.
Right. Well, and I think, when I was writing 40 weeks, I was doing that just with, just general spacing. And there's a lot of poetry in there. So that was really important for that too. But even then, so I created these different spaces in my writing while I was writing. And then you took that to another level with the design, with, making certain pieces, like certain words bigger in some of my shorter entries. And of course, we had a different font for the actual quotes, which there's around 40-ish in the whole book, maybe 35 to 40. We used a different font for that. And you really like looked at specific words. Okay, let's make this one bigger. And not only just to make just this random word bigger, but I mean, it was emphasis too. It was emphasis of the meaning and that kind of thing as well.
Yeah. And I think like I know that we're kind of talking a lot about this in this sort of like high level abstract way. And so if you're like, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about, Danielle and Heather, like, I think what I would recommend is to go, I think the place that it's easiest to see kind of what we're talking about is in a magazine. Like in a good magazine, you're going to see that they have this article and then they have a sidebar. You can see how they break up the long article with subheads. They've got graphic treatments. And so, just kind of like to stop in at a magazine rack and look through a bunch might give you some ideas of kind of like what a sidebar could be, or, what, how different quotes are handled and kind of about how long you might want those quotes to be too. Because I know that we've both sort of been living in this world for years and years and years. And so it can be a little challenging to wrap your head around at first. So I always think that magazines are a great place to start.
Mm-hmm. I think too, so when you may not think, I don't have any sidebars, I don't have any things like that. But when you're in the middle of writing, you may realize, Okay, here's a really good example. If all of a sudden you realize I interject stories all the time, and they're really complete stories, not just a little small anecdote. They're like almost a case study. Then that's the type of thing that you want. This is a strength for me. I'm going to use this throughout the book, and I'm going to call it out then after that, after I've realized I'm really doing this good. And then you can start incorporating that into your outline. You can say, all right, I want to make sure I have a case study here. This topic is so important, and I have tons of stories. I want on this idea. I want to make sure I get the most juicy, awesome story right here. So I'm going to put that in my outline to remind myself, I want a story there.
Yep. And the same thing too, if you decide that you want a 2 or 3 line quote at the beginning of every chapter opener, like put a placeholder for that in your outline. And maybe you don't know all the quotes up front, and that's okay. Like you can go in and fill those in, as you find them throughout your writing process. But yeah, you can just keep a little placeholder there for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's why your outline is your best friend.
So I hope we've convinced you on the magic that is the outline, and that you'll give it a try. And if you do, we'd love to hear from you how it's going. And we also wanted to talk with you, just to tell you a little bit about a program that we are currently enrolling for. It is called the Writers Workshop. And so if you're, enjoyed this conversation, this is just sort of the little itty bittiest tip of the iceberg, I think, of what's to come in the program. And I know we're both so excited about it.
Yeah. It's for 6 to 8 writers, and we have a page dedicated to it, so you can check it out too. It's writersworkshophd.com, right?
Yes, like Heather and Danielle, writersworkshophd.com. And so, within the program, we are really trying to blend a mix of our guidance and support on everything from, the early stages of the writing process, which is what we talked about today. And that is Heather's wheelhouse. Her background is in publishing. Do you want to tell people just a little bit about your...
Yeah, so I spent around 13 years as an executive development editor for one of the largest higher education publishing companies in the world. And then I actually left and studied to be a coach. And so I have a combination of editorial development, creative development, and coaching experience. And so, yeah, that I left that company about 6 years ago or so now. So, but I've been doing editorial freelance and development and coaching, and combining the two, and doing other life coaching, because what happens when you're writing a book, it brings up a lot of stuff. And so I'm able to incorporate both that development process and the coaching process to help support you. So that's kind of my backstory.
Yeah, which I think, and I got to, really, since we started working together, I've gotten to kind of witness that magic. And I think, it's one thing to work with an editor who can go through your manuscript and say, this isn't working, or like, what did you mean to do here? And maybe I just have this evil picture of an editor in my head. But I think that like your blend of expertise and knowledge, plus your coaching skills and your ability to ask great questions and to draw out insights and to really help, like you blend being able to kind of give advice and say, hey, you might want to think about, trying this. But then, you're also just helping the author, the writer, think through some things a little bit differently and come to their own decisions and conclusions. And so, like, just in witnessing you work, it really kind of feels like you are teaching and enabling them and helping them build their own skill set as a writer. And so, when they write their next book, they're going to know all these things and be that much further along on their first draft. And I'm like such a little geek. Like it was so amazing and fun to watch. And I'm like so excited, just to see the journey of everyone in the program.
Thank you, Danielle.
And
so why don't you tell them a little about what your wheelhouse is?
Okay. So Heather and we'll work with you on developing your manuscript and getting everything going. And then my half of the equation is my background is in graphic design and branding. And I also studied journalism. So I, have some experience with writing, but my wheelhouse really is in design and to help you take your manuscript, your words, your message, and craft some visuals around it that support it and elevate it and really make people fall in love with your book and want to hold it and read it and curl up with it, and just to make your words shine. It makes me so happy to do that. And so, in the program, we're not only going to be looking at helping you, find the right template for your book and, craft that, but we're also going to look at the bigger picture. Strategically, how does your book fit into your business? How is your website supporting your business? Where on your website do you want to talk about your book? How are you using social media and email marketing and all of those pieces? Because, it's one marathon, to write the book, but then you've got another one right on your heels with the marketing and promotion. And so, I think the reason we designed the program the way we did is we really want you to have the guidance and the support that you need from beginning to end. And so that, your book can really shine and reach your readers.
Yeah, I think, after being in publishing for so long, I could see every piece that needed to happen in order for you to be successful as a writer. And in addition to that, so there's the development piece and the writing, and then there's, what Danielle is bringing to the table, which is gigantic, which is the design and the marketing and branding. And those things you really can't get. Like you could go to Amazon or Create Space and you could, say, I'm going to publish this, boom, there it is. And it's not going to be the same level as it will with someone like Danielle working on your project. And so we wanted to create this custom experience for a group of people so that they can have everything they need to be successful and also have this community behind them too. So another big part of the program is workshopping your work. So not only do you get one-on-one time with me, one-on-one time with Danielle, you also will have the opportunity to workshop your manuscript, your marketing, all of the different pieces with the other creative writers in the group. And we have a couple of people who are already enrolled, and let me tell you, it is going to be a big
Yeah, I mean, just powerful, like, and inspiring and like dedicated and serious, and like they're already making me want to up-level my game. And so, that I think is what's really exciting. You're going to be surrounded by people who are in the trenches, just like you, and, maybe facing some struggles that you are and might have other ideas, if you're getting stuck somewhere. And I think that by just being able to really immerse yourself in this world, like you're not going to feel like you're all alone in the wee hours of the morning working on your book, toiling away, and you won't be alone. in this program, not at all.
Yep.
So if that sounds interesting to you or exciting to you, we would love to talk to you and talk more to see if it's a fit. If you're on the site watching this video right now, there is a box right below where you can drop your name and email in to get in touch with us, or you can reach out to us on Facebook too. Again, the URL is www.writersworkshophd.com, and I hope that you'll consider joining us.
We start in April, so you still have some time, but we are running some special things right now.
Yes, so we have an incentive going right now where if you enroll by the end of February, there is a financial discount, but you also will get some bonus one-on-one sessions with us. So even though the program starts in April, you can pretty much get started immediately and book your session with us. And we've already had some people do that and jump on those one-on-one sessions, and the momentum can start now. It doesn't have to wait until April. So thank you again for joining us. I'm Danielle Baird.
And I'm Heather Doyle Fraser.
And we hope you'll join us again next week. We're going to be broadcasting again on Wednesday. Do you want to?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about putting the book pieces together and building not only a successful writing practice, but also how we can give you some tips for writing the first draft of your book.
It's going to be good. Hope you tune in. Thanks again for watching.
All right. Bye.